Welcome to the Weekend Nintendo. I'm Brandon Miracle, and today I'm joined by Steve Bowling and Daniel Alba. We've got a new person here on the Weekend Nintendo, which, if you didn't know, is Good Vibes Gaming's Nintendo podcast. It's all about Nintendo, all the news, all the video games, anything you can think of Nintendo related. This is where we're going to talk about it. And I want to welcome you, Daniel. Welcome to the win. There's 3 letters in win, and now there's 3 people.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's nice to be part of the winner's circle with you guys, and I'm excited to chat and talk about all things Nintendo, because I know between all 3 of us, we have different interests in Nintendo everything, so I think it's nice to just get a broader perspective of different topics altogether.
Another reason, too, that we wanted to bring on a third person is I'm a really busy guy, as it turns out. Right after we got this show off the ground, my outside work, which is my main source of income, just blew up, and all of my time went out the window, down the drain, and into another parallel universe. So here Daniel is to help kind of to fill us out, and when I can't show up, we can still have a show. So thank you so much for being here.
No
And
problem.
then Steve, so you're not sitting there in silence for too long. How are you doing, buddy?
Oh man, I'm doing good. It's really good to be back. I've missed doing this show in particular, so I'm happy that we're going to be able to keep the win going. Even I'm super happy you have tons of work to do, but I'm also really happy that we're able to keep the show going when life is a little too hectic. So I'm glad to be here. There's been a lot of Nintendo stuff that's happened since the last time we recorded, so this should be a pretty good show.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Nintendo Switch 2, the Nintendo Switch successor, because you can't have a Nintendo show and not talk about it at this point. But before we get into that, another big thing that happened with Nintendo recently is the launch of the Nintendo Music app. And for me personally, I found this to be cool in concept, maybe not as cool in execution. I am a desktop audio listener. I don't tend to be out and about listening to music, which I know is not the norm. So Nintendo's not really servicing me. They're servicing the norm here in this case. But Daniel, you seem to have a lot to say about Nintendo Music, so I want to get your take on things.
Oh yeah, I had so much to say that I did a pseudo review of the app on our channel not too long ago, in which I jokingly kind of reviewed it as a game. It's not really a game, obviously. That was more a vehicle to talk about everyone that worked on the music, all the songs that are currently on there, all the soundtracks, as well as the composers. At least, hopefully, I'm pretty sure I researched all the composers that were involved in each of those soundtracks. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing for Nintendo to do at this point in time, because like this is something that we've always wanted for a very long time. A lot of people wanted this for a long time. They have such a grand library of music, very iconic music from throughout Nintendo's history. A lot of which are introduced here. It's in their, we'll say, starter pack of music. Kind of a hodgepodge of different games from around. Some that we understand would be there, like Ocarina of Time or Super Mario Galaxy. And other ones like Nintendogs and the Wii U channels, which was a real random toss in there. But that's actually one of my favorites, because it doesn't really have much preservation since it's just channels. It's not there's no official CD or soundtrack for that. And that's an era that reminds me of how much Nintendo put effort into their UI, from all the way back to like the DS to even the GameCube startup menu had its own little theme in the background playing. That was a reference to like how the Famicom Disk System would start up. And yeah, we don't have that anymore with the Switch. We had 3DS, Wii U, those all had just nice little jingles, and now we don't really hear those anymore. But yeah, this is just a really cool way to preserve these songs in a really high quality. Some of them have it has interesting features for some of them, because like you have features where you can extend a song for a very long time, like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour long, which I've found very handy for certain situations. And then yeah, it's just they have little albums like already assorted for you to kind of easily find your preferred music. It's, I guess the big problem is that it's just very small, relatively very small.
Yeah. They've been releasing music on there a little more frequently than I was expecting. It's like what, one game a week currently?
It's been about at this rate, it's been like once every Monday, with the exception of Mario Wonder, which came out like the day after the app release, but pretty much been once every Monday now.
That seems kind of fast, especially when you compare it to something like, NSO, just the rest of it, where those drops can come literally whenever. But the more I think about it, that's, there's 52 weeks in a year. That means every year Nintendo Music is only going to get 52 games worth of music, which, when you consider their whole library, isn't that much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting position. I think that Nintendo is a lot more aggressive with the music app than they are with, their NSO games apps, because realistically, as somebody who makes videos that often has Nintendo tracks as their backing, you do a quick search on YouTube and you can find all of these songs plus dozens more that are, extended or edited in some way. And I think Nintendo knows that, even as litigious as they are, they can't end that. Like, they're never going to stop the never-ending tide of people uploading Nintendo game music to YouTube. So this feels kind of like their answer to that, right? Like, to provide you with these things, but through a supported means. And I like it for that. But like most Nintendo offerings, it's like weird in its execution, like how they've done it. When I first heard about this, I was like, oh, this is cool for me as an existing NSO subscriber to get this. But I don't think that anybody is going to, who hasn't already got NSO, is going to be like, oh, this is what I was waiting for. This is why I'll subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online is for this. Like, it feels like a really nice thing to do for people who already invested the money, but I don't know that this nets them even one new customer. I don't think there's anybody who's like, I didn't want the online, I didn't want the N64 or GBA games, but I totally want this, and this is worth signing up for. But also just from like an app user perspective, I downloaded this thing and I primarily listen to music on my phone when I'm driving. So like in my car, and almost exclusively in my car, because like you, Brandon, if I'm at home, I'm probably sitting at a computer and that's where I'm listening to music. So for me, when I used CarPlay in my car, which is like, if you're unaware, that's like Apple's little, like, if you have a screen in your car, you plug in your phone, it shows your apps on the screen. It just doesn't work with that. Like there's nothing there. So if you play music in the NSO app, like, you just kind of get this blank screen on your car. Like, your car screen just turns black and like you hear the music coming through. And I was like, just a little bit, like, you got 80% of the way there.
Nintendo should just, add a subtitle to their company. Nintendo, 80% of the way there. It's a shame that there's no desktop version of the app, because just to give you a little insight into my life, I'm listening to Nintendo music right now. Not the app. I'm just on YouTube listening to Nintendo music while we talk. So it would be really nice if the app was available here, because I would actually use it, because I do like the features. I like the ability to extend how long a song plays right in the app, that's super cool. The ability to hide songs that may spoil certain elements of a game, also really cool, because that's a risk you run into when you're searching for these tracks on YouTube, especially. YouTube likes to spoil games even before they come out sometimes. So, it'd be really nice to just have that functionality built into the app, but available on desktop. So they're not quite all the way there, but it is neat.
That is very much like just a bonus for the people that are subscribed. It's not something that is like a necessity for people. That's not like a super high priority for Nintendo as things stand. And I hope that does change in the future, because I know, like you guys, a lot of people would find this a lot more accessible if you can just access it from more places, like your desktop where you guys are working from. Or because I have like my iPhone, my iPad, I'm listening to this pretty constantly, or just music in general constantly on in my car, doing dishes, or just around the house and whatnot, or just having it off to the side while I'm working on something else on my computer. So that'd be nice to have just a bit more, honestly. But the app itself, I mean, what is there is pretty cool, I would say. Kind of a weird hodgepodge of games, though. Like, you have Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance, not like Three Houses or something. The more popular title, or Awakening. You have like what else? You have Mario Karts 8 Deluxe, but it doesn't have all the music. Like there's a lot of different variations to the track, like Final Lap
80% of the way there.
Yeah, it just has the basic tracks and Final Lap, but it doesn't have like when you're front running, it adds percussion in the background that people don't really notice sometimes. And just a lot of other little bits. The most recent one has F-Zero X for the N64, but it doesn't include the version of music that has that it was included with the expansion kit, which has more songs on it. The most notable one being a remix of Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 64, but in the F-Zero X sound fonts, like the exact same one.
Oh,
and
I'd
I
love
thought
to hear that.
that would have been really cool. Listen to that, anyone sometime. That's a really cool remix of that song because it's like MIDI rock guitar instead. But for what it is, like it's still really early on. Like this app just pretty much still just came out, so there's a lot of room for them to like expand. Hopefully do more frequent updates, and if they want to do something like add it on desktop or other places so people can access it, that would be a good thing too. Or just have it so that not just NSO subscribers can have it, because music is it's music. Music shouldn't be locked to to a subscription like that.
If they wanted to monetize it, and I'm not saying it should be, I could see like an extra option, just like a $2-3 a month. If you aren't an NSO subscriber, you don't have a Nintendo Switch, but you still want access to the music. Give people an option just to spend a couple bucks to have a piece of that. I think they would actually gain some subscribers if they did that, rather than the model it is now. Because like Steve said earlier, no one's subbing to this. No one's subbing to NSO for Nintendo Music. They're subbing it for Nintendo Switch Online. And this is just a bonus. It's a nice bonus, but this shouldn't be the only way you can access those things.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the last thing would be, well, for me anyways, would be like also with this app, I wouldn't expect any like super recent games to be on there. Like we got Super Mario Brothers Wonder. That's the most recent one, but that game came out like a year ago. Even with Splatoon 3, nothing from Side Order is inside the Splatoon 3 soundtrack, mostly because that is going to have an actual physical release in Japan for the CD coming out soon. So Japan is a lot more they're a lot more serious about the music, and so there will be a lot more physical editions and CDs coming out for these titles. And so I don't think they're going to release anything too recent until they have a chance to monetize it another way. But I imagine Side Order will come like maybe sometime in 2025, but probably not right now. So
it would be nice, and I think this could be a cool in-game kind of integration, is if you were able to gain access to tracks from a new game you bought, but it only unlocked the tracks in the app that you've heard in-game.
Oh, that would be so cool. I could see that being something like a Switch 2 feature. I have to imagine, and I'm sure we'll talk more about Switch 2 later in the show, but I have to imagine that at some point, when designing these systems, that would be where you could build in those capabilities. And I mean, there's so many questions around Nintendo's next console, but I would like to even see, the return of like that popular Xbox 360 feature where you could swap your game soundtracks. Like if you could just take a soundtrack from, say a different Mario game and apply it to, whatever you're playing on NSO, that would be a huge reason for me to sub to this service, to have access to these tracks. If I could play them over the soundtracks of, whatever game I'm playing on a Nintendo console.
Mm-hmm. Well, we might not know if that's a feature that's coming to Switch 2, but we do know a different feature that's coming to Switch 2, and that's backwards compatibility. This is so exciting. It's also something that everyone was just kind of assuming would be a feature for Switch 2 in general, but it's really, really validating, I guess, to hear it from Nintendo itself, knowing that the games that we've purchased on Nintendo Switch will work on Nintendo Switch 2. Me and my almost 90% digital library are very happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's like you said, everybody reasonably assumed that the Switch 2 would be doing this. I've assumed this since really, the Switch 1 launch, because they said at the time that the Switch 1 came out that they'd entered into, I think, like a 20-year partnership with NVIDIA for chips for their systems. And so that really reasonably to me meant at the time, whatever system comes after the Switch will be based on similar architecture, the same way the PS5 is essentially an extremely souped up PS4, right? That's why most of your PS4 games play on your PS5. And so I expected something very similar here, where we would get, a much more powerful version of the same system architecture so that all your games could natively run without having to do like software emulation. And I still believe that will be what we find out. And I think it's going to be so similar to how Sony has handled cross-gen upgrades that it's, we're all going to be kind of used to it, where you'll get your kind of two classes of games. Your first class is just games that run the way they ran, and your second class is where the developers maybe put out an update patch where, it will either unlock frame rates or make resolutions higher, but in some noticeable way improve the game, though it is still, a Switch 1 game at its core.
Yeah, I think the release or the news of this is probably the least surprising thing about the Switch 2, but it's also just very nice to confirm that this is going to be a feature for the Switch 2. And this helps to highlight, because I remember we talked about this a bit earlier this year, but this helps to highlight the fact that when you go from something like the PS5 to the PS5 Pro, when it comes down to it, there's not so much of a visual difference. There's only so much further that we can take this hardware and its fidelity and to make games look. But when you look back a bit, when Nintendo's playing the long game here, in which you go from the Switch, and now when you go to the presumed specs for the Switch 2, that's a considerable leap. And so people are going to be, comparatively, people are like, oh wow, so this game is going to look, these games will look and run a lot better compared to the previous generation. And there's a bit of a just a bit of a difference there between two consoles that is just a bit blurred more so with the PlayStation 5 and even with Xbox as well. But yeah, just to see where we're going to go with how much more powerful these games are going to be, it's an exciting prospect.
I'm hopeful that there's a decent selection of games at launch that will have some kind of upgrade baked in. This isn't something I hate thinking this way, but this is Nintendo we're talking about, 80% of the way there. This is going to be a drip feed situation, isn't it? Where games are just going to slowly get these performance upgrades baked in over the next couple of years into the Switch 2's life. Like it might launch with a Breath of the Wild 4K 60 FPS update, or, it might launch with a Mario Odyssey update, but it's not going to have all of them, and I feel very confident about that.
Yeah, it's a situation I could totally envision the scenario that you're describing, because I could see us, 2 years on from now, right, waiting for the inevitable like Switch game update portion of a Nintendo Direct, where we're like, great, which 4 games are we getting an update for this time?
Oh no.
It's 2028 and we're finally getting a Tears of the Kingdom patch. But alternatively, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that the incredibly long silence from Nintendo on this platform could mean that maybe they recognize the importance of having like a good selection of these day and date with the launch of their new console, either because they just don't have enough software. We've seen many Nintendo console launches where they're like, you get 2 games and that's it. See you next year. I'm hoping that's not the case, but we could, potentially see Nintendo wanting to monetize that 150 million plus user base of Switch users, right? And say, whatever game you've got, if it was made by us, you're going to have a better time with it on this new platform. So, you that only bought Animal Crossing, or you that only bought the Zelda games, like, yeah, they play better on this now. But the other part is I get some sense that there's just some some major disorganization within Nintendo around the Switch 2 or the Switch successor, because the way they've been communicating this hardware cycle is so weird. Like just getting the random like 3 a.m. tweet from Furukawa on the official Nintendo account, it's like, what is going on here? That this is how you're drip feeding us information. Like, we didn't even mention it yet, but that's what this was, right? That we just got a "this is Furukawa" tweet about backwards compatibility with nothing else.
It's so weird that it's been going on like this and for so long. Like, I remember the NX to Switch reveal fervor just being unbearable. But, and it could be that that was so long ago now that I'm starting to forget how I felt. But to me, this is starting to feel worse. This cycle has been so long. So I think the amount of time, I think the scale is different, right? Like Wii U was what, 5 years? And then Switch is, it's going to be 8 years and 3 months, isn't it? Or 4 months?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much.
So that period of time where we know that there's a console coming to reveal, that scales up because we've been waiting longer.
Well, I think also the fact is, in the Wii U era, a lot of players had written Nintendo off. I mean, that thing sold literally less than 10% of what the Switch has sold. And now you have, again, 150 million plus people who are wanting Nintendo to update this piece of hardware. So just the audience size, the sheer number of people waiting for it is much larger. And like you said, we're in an unprecedented wait period, right? This is the longest Nintendo generation ever. And so we're just I think the kind of collective anxiety of the Nintendo community has been building, and Nintendo's not helping anything by, every time they announce something, they also have to follow up the tweet with, "We're not going to talk about the Switch 2 at this thing either." And then it's just reached a point. I remember in the late NX days, every Nintendo tweet was just like, "Just show us the NX already." Like every reply was like, "Come on, just stop it." There was famously on Reddit, just "tomorrow" was like the comment everyone would make. Tomorrow.
I remember that. Yeah.
and
tomorrow TM.
Exactly. And it feels like we've been in Tomorrowland for like a year now with the Switch.
Well, I mean, we know for a fact that between now and the next 4 months, the Switch 2 will have to have been revealed because they told us it would be. But despite knowing that, like, in some ways it makes it worse because it literally could be any day. Not quite tomorrow levels, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I was fully Team October. I thought for sure Nintendo would look at the success they had with the Switch and they would just replicate it. Okay, we reveal in October, we release in March, and now that October has come and gone, we're just kind of in uncharted territory. And at this point, I think you don't reveal it till next year, because what's the point of tanking your Christmas sales by announcing a new console? So, I mean, I would say any point from January on is fair game, but I wouldn't expect it before then now.
Yeah, this is a very different Nintendo, all things considered, compared to when they were in dire straits with the Wii U and just wanting to get the Switch out at that point, compared to now. It's the Switch is one of the most successful eras they ever had. And so it's like, no, they can still squeeze out another year, squeeze out another holiday sales. Because I had a feeling like if they weren't going to reveal it by the fall, like they're not going to, jeopardize their Switch 1 sales. They got one more, I keep saying, they got one more season left of selling that Mario Kart 8 bundle.
Oh my God.
They got to sell as many as they can.
But there's an interesting part of that too that's worth bringing up now. Daniel, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I think for the first time since the Switch launched, it's on sale.
Yeah.
For a substantial amount of money off.
And that's something that Nintendo doesn't really do very much. Like they'll only do it unless it's like absolutely necessary, because they don't want to like devalue their hardware by selling it at a cheaper price. And we've only seen that happen not even that often these days. Like the major one I remember was obviously for the 3DS, when that went down like $70 after the first months that it was released because it just was not selling well enough. And that was just pretty much out of necessity. But at this point, yeah, we've been waiting and waiting to see, is the Switch ever going to go on sale? Because pretty much most other consoles leading up to the Switch have had their price drops, and it hadn't happened until recently.
This year we have multiple Switch SKUs with bundles that, and multiple games, not just Mario Kart 8. We've got Mario Kart 8. We've got, I think there's a Wonder bundle as well. And I want to say there was one other one that may be slipping my mind, but they have that in OLED and standard. And I just looked on Target, their website, and they have Black Friday deals for the standard Switch bundle with Mario Kart 8 for $225. And even the OLED bundle is on sale at $275, which,
wow,
is a pretty nice deal when you consider
that's a massive price cut.
It's a $350 machine typically, and it comes with Mario Kart. Like this is unprecedented for the Switch era, and that's a clear signposting that says this is the last Nintendo Switch holiday season. The last one.
Yeah, it's wild to me that Nintendo made it this entire generation without ever cutting the price. When you talk about historically, all their other consoles have seen a price cut in their generation, like a permanent price cut, maybe midway through, right? Even the SNES ended up down at like $99. The N64, GameCube, Wii U certainly got a price cut, so Nintendo, and that's typically a sign from a platform holder of flagging success, right? Like they realize, okay, if we want to keep sales momentum, we have to lower the price because that's the only way we're going to move more units. But the Switch hasn't had that problem. And I suspect this is just a way of clearing out inventory because obviously Nintendo doesn't want to have millions of Switch 1 units on hand when the Switch 2 becomes the next big thing. I do want to ask this though, because this is something I've posited for a while now. Do we think that when the Switch 2 launches, that Nintendo is going to keep the Switch 1 on shelves, let's say, at like a lower price point as an entryway into the ecosystem now that we know from Nintendo that backwards compatibility is on the table?
I don't think you see the original Switch model leave store shelves for a few years. At the very least, I think the Switch Lite doesn't go away, and either the standard Switch or the Switch OLED, one of those models is going to stick around. And they're going to use Nintendo's favorite strategy, the 3-pillar strategy.
Yep.
They're gonna offer these lighter versions of the Switch, even though it's technically a different piece of hardware at the end of the day. At lower price points, you could buy them for your kids. There's probably going to be a bevy of Switch 2 games that still play on Switch 1. That's something I don't think enough people are talking about. Like a lot of the games that might come out as Switch 2 games, I think are still going to be Switch 1 games as well. And I think that might persist for quite some time. We've seen it with the other platform holders.
Right. I actually think my theory is it's similar to yours. It's a little different. I think we get the Switch Lite and the OG Switch or the V2 Switch. Those stay. But I think if the rumors are true, let's be clear, because we don't know anything until Nintendo says it. But the rumor is that the Switch 2 will not have an OLED display. The rumor is it'll be an LCD display, albeit a larger one. And if that is true, I don't know how you position the Switch OLED as an inferior option when looking at them right side by side. You'd be like, oh, well, this display is way nicer than the one on the more expensive one. So why don't I buy that? I'm super hopeful that rumor is wrong because I'd hate having to go from the beautiful screen on the Switch OLED to a lower quality display on a new unit. But maybe Nintendo again is copying their own playbook and we get a mid-gen refresh with an OLED screen.
This may be answered already with the hardware specs that we've gotten via, shipping leaks and whatnot. But just because it's an LCD panel doesn't mean there aren't the opportunities for like local dimming zones.
True.
Like on a small screen, which emulates, what an OLED does. By allowing, the certain sections of the screen to be dimmer than others to get close to those inky blacks on an OLED without quite hitting it. I have a TV with, local dimming zones, and it does look nice. It looks nicer than a panel that doesn't have it. And while I don't think that would, solve the problem that you've positioned when you have them side by side, I think it does lessen the blow of not having an OLED screen a little bit more too.
I could agree with that. I just wonder if Nintendo will opt for, a system that is objectively cheaper to produce, right? The V2 Switch definitely would be cheaper for them, and they could then offer it at a much lower price, like say $190 or $99 for a Switch Lite, $199 for a dockable Switch V2, and then I'm going to presume $399 to $499 or $449 for the Switch 2. I think $399 would be a real sweet spot given how much consoles currently cost. But I hate to say it, but Sony and Microsoft have given Nintendo the headroom to go pretty high on their pricing.
I would suggest the OLED maybe going down to like $249.99 so that that price gap isn't as astronomical. Yeah. Like between the OLED and the Switch 2. Because if the Switch 2 is, $399.99, you want it to seem more premium without making it look ridiculous.
Yeah,
that's fair. It's interesting times. Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
Oh no, just because like PlayStation feels like they have the room to be like, oh, this is like the very most premium option for those that are like really hardcore into our ecosystem. But Nintendo, I can never see Nintendo like hiking the price up that much for something that they want to have people play their games. Like it's more for a broader general audience than what you see for PlayStation. And so having it be affordable but still look nicer than what came before it is something that they're still going to prioritize. And I can't imagine all the marketing talk that's been happening in like the last couple of years for this system. Like there must be so much going on, because we also have kind of an idea of how many Switch 2s we're going to see out there in the wild, right?
Yeah, so we have a rumor from Fami Boards, and this rumor comes from the same person who had a sketch of the Switch like a month or two ago. I don't know if either of you saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty like run of the mill sketch. It is a little interesting, but what's more interesting is that they've got this rumor now about how many Switch units are going to be shipped at launch. And it's 7 million, which I think compared to the Switch 1, it's like 2.5 times the volume is what they said. So I wonder what you guys think about that. I remember the Switch being hard to find for people for a while, especially during the pandemic, but I don't quite remember what it was like at launch, and I don't know how much sense it makes to overproduce. Though it would be nice to avoid scalping and whatnot, but I want your take on it, Steve. What do you think?
So I actually I reviewed the original Switch, so I got mine early. However, at the time, I had no idea that was going to happen. Nintendo like did not promise me one; they just kind of sent me one, and so I had one pre-ordered. I actually had 3 pre-ordered for like myself and friends, but because of changes in life and my role in games journalism at the time, I ended up hosting a launch in the town I lived in at the time. So I hosted a GameStop midnight release party for the Switch, and it was quite unlike anything I'd seen before. I would say that, peak Nintendo launch chaos was definitely the Wii back in 2007 or 2006. I wouldn't say that people were quite like, pitching tents and getting sleeping bags outside of Target for the Switch. But I do remember that it was raw chaos. Like, Switch units were like coming in and getting snapped up like as quickly as they could. In fact, I've spent a long time kind of covering tech launches. And if I could compare it to anything historically, like ever in the tech space, it reminded me of the iPod craze of like the early 2000s when people weren't necessarily like camping out on site to try to get one, but you couldn't keep one in your inventory for more than a few minutes, like because you had a steady flow of people coming in being like, do you have this? Do you have the Switch? That entire first year of the Switch's life was just constant out of stocks, like people coming in to buy them as soon as stores got them. But not like the same level of hysteria that the Wii engendered among people. Like it wasn't really, like you said, until 2020 that people really like became rabid over getting a Switch. Like, once Animal Crossing dropped and the kind of confluence of that with the pandemic, that's when kind of widespread awareness of the Switch happened, and people, who didn't traditionally buy consoles went out and it had its Wii moment where everybody was just kind of jumping over each other to get one. But yeah, it was definitely it was one of Nintendo's more popular launches, let's say. I remember getting my Wii U and I was like the only guy. Like I was the only person who picked one up that day. I and that was following the Wii. So like I showed up at 5 a.m. at GameStop, sleeping bag and all this stuff in case I had to camp outside, and I was there for like 3 hours and they just opened their door. They're like, yeah, you're the only guy. Here's your Wii U. And I took that as a sign of the Wii U's future fortunes. And of course it was. But with the Switch, I would say that people, definitely, I think Nintendo did a great job of communicating the concept of the Switch in their initial advertisements for it. And it got a lot of people on board. But it's one that I think Nintendo is smart about this, because obviously the popularity of the console has built up massively over the last 8 years. And so now there's a lot more people that are like, oh, you're doing another one? Sign me up. Like, I want that. So I think that 7 million units, I don't think we're going to see crazy out of stocks, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it's harder to find one than you might think, given that number.
Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, it might just be as simple as, oh, there's a much larger install base for the Switch who might be interested in the Switch too. So let's make a much larger, first shipment of these consoles. But also is Nintendo being careful about, okay, we don't want to be like overzealous, but also we want to be careful about this at the same time. Because with the Switch 1, like we had no idea how this was going to do whatsoever, considering how the Wii U just kind of tanked for them. So it's like, well, this might be a good concept. This might not be something that works out in the end. So we're going to release this amount. And then it just luckily was for their benefits. Glad we didn't have anything as crazy as the Wii as well. Because I remember camping out on Target with like 5 other friends, waiting for the Wii to come out, playing DS out there in the cold, and then just celebrating getting that, and just seeing the mass hysteria afterwards of people that were trying to get it for years, actually. And something I'm sure Nintendo appreciated, all the publicity of having like their store shortages and like, oh, it's just a hot item and no one can get a hold of it. But I think their tone has definitely changed at this point, where it's just like, no, let's just get as many of these out there to as many people as possible, because like we already have a strong foundation of what came beforehand, and you don't want to lose that as much as possible. So my hope is that it's not going to be hard to find one, but you never know when you got over 100 million people who have a Switch in their households already.
I'm wondering too, like if they're using prior like handheld launches that they've had as kind of a blueprint for this, because Nintendo was no stranger to having multiple editions of every handheld they've ever released. And I don't know how much they produced for initial shipping in most of those cases, but I wonder if they're viewing it through that lens where they're like, oh, we don't have to worry about this as much because people who buy our handhelds usually buy our other models and editions of the same handhelds. And you see that a little bit already with the Lite and the OLED model as it is. And I wonder if they're kind of grouping the Switch 2 into that kind of mindset.
That's an interesting thought, because Nintendo clearly, does view the Switch as a handheld to some degree, right? In line with their previous offerings, DS, Game Boy. But I have to wonder if this is based on any of those, because honestly, I couldn't tell you what the shipping numbers were for either of those platforms, right? But yeah, I mean, I can say, I own a couple of Switch Lites. I have the OLED, and I still somewhere have my original like floating around the house. And I'm a sucker for special editions and stuff like that. I had an OLED. I bought both the Splatoon and the Tears of the Kingdom ones when they came out. And I'm like, oh, I'll find a use for these other Switches that I have. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that does that. I know a couple members of our community went further than I did and also bought like the Mario Red OLED. But I think that Nintendo, I would imagine their strategy for launch is probably based on X percentage of the existing Switch user base and wanting to get an initial big push of Switch 1 owners over there. Because, one of the cool things about the Switch is that its portable nature allows you to almost advertise it for Nintendo, right? Like, I can't tell you the number of people who, when the Switch was new, saw me playing it and they're like, oh my God, is that the new Nintendo thing? And I'm like, yeah. And I'd hand them the Joy-Con and be like, why don't you run around in Breath of the Wild or play some Mario Kart? And I would have people at my desk at work be like, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm going to go get one of these when I can. I'm like, good luck. You're not going to find it. I mentioned earlier how my Switch pre-orders, I had a couple and one of them was meant for me. And I had a review unit and I was playing it at my day job at the time, because back then I worked in an office, and one of my coworkers came by and I had this weird like bookshelf where it was facing just inward toward my desk. So I would hide my Switch in there during the workday because I wasn't supposed to be showing it to people. And I was playing Breath of the Wild, just kind of looking into my bookshelf. And one of my coworkers caught me and he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm playing a video game in my bookshelf. And he came over and he saw it and he's like, oh my God, you have a Nintendo Switch. And he's like, I've been trying to get one. I can't find one. And so he took my pre-order and bought my pre-ordered Switch off me after seeing it like in person. He was like, I have to have that. And I imagine that that's going to be a similar situation with Switch 2, right? Like we already know a couple people who aren't super hardcore gamers in our lives, but have a Switch. And if you show people like, oh, I got the new Switch, like the new better Switch, it's going to be like when you show your friends your new shiny phone, right? Like, you've got this thing, but I've got the newer version that does more stuff. And I imagine Nintendo is counting on a certain number of those people, like finding those of us who sought out the Switch 2 at launch because we read or saw or did something about it. And then the people who are more casual about it may not even know Nintendo's releasing a new thing. And they want to have enough stock for those people to go to a store and be like, I heard there's a new Switch. Do you have it? And I'm guessing that that's really what their angle is here. Having enough to have some on shelves so that people aren't like waiting and then losing interest, right? Like, oh, I wanted this, but then I forgot about it and I don't care anymore.
Yeah, I'm curious how that will perform once, launch event, eventually actually happens. I'd like for this to be as successful as the Switch. We're kind of in a different market than we were back then with the Switch 1, because now you're going to have people out there with a Steam Deck or an A and Neo or any of these other handheld PCs, surely in lesser numbers than the Switch. But something like Steam Deck definitely caught on more than even I thought it would. And, does Nintendo continue to keep the mind share they did in the handheld space amidst those platforms being out there alongside it?
See, now, interestingly, I actually think that we're going to see a situation in which eventually, over a longer course of time, Nintendo loses the dominance in this field. And I think it's going to be a very similar situation to the iPhone. Like, the iPhone redefined what phones are. Everyone, agrees on that much. Whether you love iPhones or you hate them, before there's two distinct periods in cell phone history. There's before iPhone and everything that came after. And right now, iPhone is not the dominant sales-wise. They're not the dominant force in the smartphone space. Android has blown past them completely for many, many years now. Like, the vast majority of phones out there are Android phones, but you wouldn't know it because most people talk about their iPhone, right? Whereas with Android, you have a lot of fragmentation and segmentation within that community. So there are people who are Google fans or Huawei fans or what have you. And Nintendo has kind of created this whole new console market segment with these hybrid consoles, right? Like, the Switch is not a handheld, but it's also not a dedicated console. It exists in this middle ground that they created. And of course, other companies, Valve, Asus, you name it, they've found footing in that space now, and they're building their own hardware, but it's very much based on the Switch concept. And I think what we're going to see is that people will still recognize the Switch as like the leading brand name in that space, as the ones who created it. And you'll have loads of people who buy it because, I mean, like the three of us, there's loads of people who will buy any Nintendo platform to play Nintendo games on. But I think you'll see that while other companies may eventually overtake Nintendo's market share in this space, Nintendo will still be the name people most associate with it, and it'll still have a strong footing all its own.
Yeah, there's so many different kinds of products that Nintendo has made that others have parodied and have their own version of it all the way since like I think especially about like the Wii with their motion controls, like they caught on with like PlayStation Move and Connect and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, Nintendo's usually the one that you think about when you think of like, oh, the ones that really locked in motion controls, or even with the Wii U, that was like the prototype of the Switch with the gamepad, and they just kind of redefined that and refined it into what it is now. And all of a sudden this year, yeah, we see everyone trying to, or not this year, this whole generation, many different companies and competitors just trying to capture that sort of thing. And some have caught on more than others. Like as you mentioned, the Steam Deck, like people can just take these full on like console or PC worthy titles just anywhere on the go. And that's very appealing to a lot of people still. And it's like, well, what about the Switch 2 that they can do different, that they can, catch on with this generation? And it doesn't feel like that they're going to try, at least at this point, it doesn't feel like they need to try too much harder to capture that audience because they already have that audience there. There's no need to really iterate at this point. We just want a stronger version of what we have now to be able to do more than what we've had in the past. And yeah, like I think, yeah, as you were saying, no matter where it goes, like with like iPhone is still like the definitive touchscreen phone that people think of. I think like the handheld console and gaming, Nintendo might remain to be the main household name for that as well, because they really started it from the get-go.
It's interesting to think about too, because we have a similar before and after period with gaming with the Switch, because before Switch, handheld gaming was a very different thing than it is now. They were bespoke platforms with bespoke games that we played on bespoke devices. But now the Nintendo Switch and Steam Deck, we're playing games that we typically play at home on the TV, and we're playing them anywhere. So, I think I'm starting to kind of see it that way, where having a Switch is no different than having a phone. It's just something you have. It's just something that people have. And it's, if you're a gamer, you have a handheld. And if you have a handheld, it's probably a Switch. And I think I agree. I think that's just going to be the way it is going forward. Because I can't imagine not being able to play my console level experiences on the go anymore. That world is so foreign to me now.
Yeah, they've really, I like the way you put that, because I've always described the Switch as like a deeply personal device to me. In the same way, I view it the same way I view my phone. It's something that I want to have in my bag with me whenever I'm leaving the house. And, I remember, I'm as the oldest member of this panel by an embarrassing degree. I remember the days of the DS and being excited that 3D games were available to me in my pocket. But there was still that sense of like, it's not all the way there yet. I want a console, a DS, if you will, that will play, modern games. I want to play Super Mario Sunshine instead of Super Mario 64. I want to play, Wind Waker on a device that I can hold, as that was the dream back then. And, obviously older portable gaming, the vision of portable gaming back then was that it was always by nature a limited experience, that it was just a bite-sized version of those experiences you had at home on your TV, and Nintendo eliminated that. They finally achieved that dream of like, we can just play whatever we want, wherever we want. And there's something about that makes it very difficult to imagine going back to a world where that doesn't exist, because that freedom of choice is something that I don't think players are going to want to have taken away from them.
Yeah, I think we're well past that period of time, and there's no going back now. The floodgates are open and everything's wet. So we're here, and now we're just looking forward. So, speaking of looking forward, we've done this a couple times before, but since we've been wrong every single time and probably will continue to be, I'm going to pose the question again. When is the Switch 2 going to be revealed, Steve?
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna go with March. I think that Nintendo's gonna wait till the last possible minute because that's the most Nintendo thing they can do is leave us hanging until the final possible day that they could reveal it. So I'm gonna say March.
Daniel?
I'm gonna say they're not gonna wait too long to the beginning of the year to start that hype up a little bit early. Maybe I would say the end of January. That's where I'm gonna put the ballpark area for this reveal. So yeah, I mean, they want to get that in people's heads as soon as they can. I imagine because this is something that people have just been waiting for, and just right after the holiday seasons would be a good time to do so, especially when things are kind of slow in January. And the beginning of the years sometimes tend to be a bit slower than others. So that just seems to make more sense to me.
I'm still of the belief that it could release in March, and I'm only partly saying that because I want it to be true because I'm tired of waiting. So I'm gonna say middle of January would be a good time for that. That's around the time that Donkey Kong Returns HD comes out, and the only other Switch game we'd be waiting for beyond that is Xenoblade Chronicles X and Pokemon Legends ZA, which doesn't even have a release date. I think that's it.
Yeah, Legends ZA is still a big unknown as well. We haven't seen anything else about it, just the trailer. There's no actual gameplay out of it now, so who knows if that's going to be solely on the Switch at this point.
My brain is leaning no on that one, but that's a whole other topic we could have.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, we've got end of January, mid-January, and last possible moment in March. But we want to hear from y'all as well. Let us know down in the comments below when you think the Switch 2 is going to be revealed. And if you're tired about us talking about the Switch 2, well, too bad.
It begins.
It's just going to keep happening. I'm sorry, it's happening. Nintendo's not releasing anything else, so this is where we're at. But I want to thank you guys for listening. Steve, why don't you tell people where they can follow us?
Yeah, obviously, if you're watching us here on YouTube, you know where to find us there. You can find The Win on every podcast service around the globe. But if you'd like to join our winner's circle, head over to patreon.com/gvgaming, where for as little as $1 a month, you can join our Patreon community with access to our Discord. But if you'd like to get exclusive updates on The Win and all other things, you can join our live audience tier for as little as $5. There's a ton of other stuff beyond that. Love for you to go check it out again, patreon.com/gvgaming.
All right, gang, we will see you next week for the next episode of The Week in Nintendo. But until then, keep the games good and the vibes greater. Bye now.
Bye.
We meet again.